In this episode,
shared passwords, shared email addresses, baby monitors in the house. You don't realise how that can be weaponised.
welcome to There's No Place Like Home, Paths to Healing. This series is about domestic abuse, listen with care, produced on what always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Made in partnership with Commonwealth Bank, who are supporting people within Australia experiencing financial abuse through CommBank Next Chapter, even if you don't bank with them. For many, escaping from an abusive home is just the beginning, because there's surviving the immediate crisis and then there's recovery, everything that comes next.
Garage door keys were missing. Everything becomes a little bit suspicious.
That was completely an unintended outcome of digital banking. There's actually much greater thinking around, well, how do we actually stop these from being misused?
Pip Ray thought her new smartwatch was a thoughtful present from her partner. In reality, it was a way to track her every move. In the wrong hands, technology can be used to instill fear. But in the right hands, it's a shield to defend and protect, a safeguard for systems and a tool to track perpetrators. In this episode, I'm joined by Pip Ray, a survivor strategist who's using her own story of tech abuse to educate systems and the people working in them about the insidious reality of the digital world. And CommBank's Angela McMillan, who shares how Australia's biggest bank is harnessing tech to stop digital abuse in its tracks, keep customers safe, and even support their long-term financial recovery.
Pip and Angela, thank you so much for joining There's No Place Like Home, Paths to Healing. Pip, I'll go to you first. You've experienced tech abuse in your life. As much as you're comfortable, would you mind sharing those experiences?
Yeah, so my experience is quite unique in that I used to be a police officer, so I had insight into, behind closed doors of other people's experiences. And I guess for me, when I was seeing it happening in my own home, I didn't think that it was enough to go to the police with. Everything becomes normal. It's the behaviour becomes normalised. The technical gifts become normalised. So you get the latest tech, but you don't realise how that can be weaponised because there's so much trust and there's so much sort of blindness to what is actually going on. And I think, shared passwords, shared email addresses even. For me, I found out a lot about it after my relationship broke down. So after my marriage had ended, and as you do when you're trying to work out where things are at, you start to see just how many, elements inside your house, right down to, garage door keys were missing. We had baby monitors in the house. Like it just everything becomes a little bit suspicious.
So looking back now that you do reflect, what were the ways that tech was weaponised against you and what was the emotional impact of that on you in your day-to-day life?
So he wasn't on social media, but his friends were. So it's that information where, we're no longer together or you're posting a photo from, say, the snow. He then knows that you're not at home. And instead of honouring that space that's your house, that's where you lived, and he's no longer there, he was able to come back. The alarms were turned off, furniture was moved around, and then you just feel like you've been invaded. You don't know what has happened in that space while you've been away. So then that makes your world very small when you don't feel like you can travel or you don't feel like you can do things.
You describe yourself as a survivor strategist, which is a term I hadn't heard until I met you and which I absolutely love. Can you tell me what that actually means?
It means that I've worked in a lot of jobs and found out some of the incidents that do actually happen to people. And so from that, there's about 134 in tech. So that means that I've been able to map out those behaviours and look for the indicators of what tech abuse does to people and the harms that it creates and the impact that it has, and then work out what strategy from a system or a process or an organisation would effectively shut that down. So my work at the eSafety Commissioner was training police about how to, identify the tech abuse because I had seen it myself and it looks normal. It's very difficult to describe and prove in that system.
Yeah, that speaks really well, Pip, to the role that systems play as well, and identifying where systems can be harnessed to prevent, to respond, which is why we have you here, Angela McMillan. You are the Group Customer Advocate at CommBank and you work in the Next Chapter team. Can you tell me a little bit about what Next Chapter is?
So we have a big focus, obviously, on financial abuse, and that's because CommBank is Australia's largest bank. And we were hearing about 10 years ago from advocates in the sector, so Rosie Batty and Moo Bolch and others, who came to us and said, your customers are experiencing this really horrific abuse, and often you're able to see it in your data, you're able to see it in your systems. And so 5 years ago, we established CommBank Next Chapter as our group-wide commitment to doing what we can to help end financial abuse in the context of domestic and family violence in Australia. And so the program itself has 4 pillars. The first being providing support to anyone who might be experiencing financial abuse or tech-facilitated abuse as well in the context of domestic and family violence through our dedicated Next Chapter team. Now, this is a trauma-informed group of specialists who are there no matter who you bank with. You can call up, you can chat if you are a CommBank customer, but you can call up even if you're not, and have a discussion with the team around the situation that you're in and the help that you might need. And they can do a whole range of things like making your banking safe, which can include deregistering some of those unauthorised devices, as well as opening new accounts, giving you new PINs, and referring you into other parts of the organisation. We know that banks are really large and complex to navigate, and so how do you get the other support that you might need with your banking? The second pillar is really around long-term financial independence. So we heard very early on from victim survivors that it's okay, it's great to get that support in the moment, but what does that then mean on that longer path to recovery? Because it is really difficult to build that financial confidence, particularly when so much of banking is digital, particularly if you've been impacted by that tech-facilitated abuse. So we have a partnership with Good Shepherd, and that has led to the establishment of the Financial Independence Hub. Thirdly, we partner with organisations, both at grassroots and in academia, around how do we come up with innovative, really human-centred ways of getting ahead of these forms of abuse. We know that perpetrator behaviour continues to evolve, so how do we work with particular groups to get ahead of that and really kind of prevent it? Which brings me to the fourth pillar, which is probably the area that we're focused on the most at the moment, which is around prevention. It's great to have those supports in place for when it happens, but how do you actually stop it from happening in the first instance?
One of the things I was thinking when you were just talking was about how I've had a client who was gone shopping, has had access to that account for over 2 or 3 years during their relationship, and suddenly she doesn't have access. It says no, refer to banker. And I think there's a capacity there where he's been able to call. He was able to say, please take her off the account. He's been able to do things by himself because it was one to sign, or it was a joint account that gave him access. So it's about putting those checking mechanisms back in so that if there is a joint account or if it is something that he has access to, do they know that the other person is getting that information before that transaction's taking place or before that change is being made? So even in my circumstance, my mortgage, which I didn't have, was changed so that it was now my liability. Because he was able to do that over the phone. So there was no one rang me and said, is this the new arrangement? Because they basically said, well, we don't care who pays it. And it goes right through to even creating new identities. They can literally, if you've got a partner who is quite savvy, they are able to create that identity, set it up as a wage, pull in that money to you in an account in your name, and then basically siphon off the money. And it's actually really live examples of where women have been left with nothing.
And I'd love to just add something, if I may, to that, because financial abuse does show up in so many different ways and it is so pervasive. Research shows that 1 in 4 Australian adults have either been subject to financial abuse themselves or know someone who has. That's a huge number. And it is so difficult to detect. It can be anything from withholding money, getting someone to work for free in a family business or a partner business, taking income away, right through to changing documentation, changing loan structures, and withholding child support. And so I love programs like this, to your point, Pip, because it raises awareness of what is happening out there, what is okay and what isn't okay, and letting people know that if any of these things are happening to you, there is that help that's out there.
Pip, when you've been in this situation where someone has abused you with technology, how do you actually regain control of your digital identity and your life?
For me, it's about confidence, building that confidence, going, I know how my tech works, I know the strategies I need, and that's why when they come to me, I literally do a 44-questionnaire and say, have you experienced this? And then from that, we build, okay, so what did that look like? And I can literally explain to them, okay, this is what you do.
And I think the challenge, if I may just jump in here, with kind of that digital safety is that you can have the most kind of lockdown, secure online presence. But, and I'll use an example from the banking sector in CommBank in particular. We had a customer who reached out to us in 2019 and reached out to the Next Chapter team, and she had a perpetrator X. She had orders in place. She had locked down her social media. She had changed phone numbers. She had moved address, did all the right things. But she was continuing to receive contact from him via a banking platform. So via NetBank and CommBank app in CommBank's case, digital banking apps that I'm sure the majority of the Australian population has. And he was sending her very low value transactions, 1 or 2 cents at a time, over and over again, and using the free text field in the transaction descriptions to send pretty horrific messages. Now, in a banking context, you actually currently can't stop that from happening. He had found the last remaining channel by which to continue to just be really horrific to her. And so when she reached out to us, we'd never built our platforms for this reason. That was completely an unintended outcome of kind of digital banking. And it was a new form of tech-facilitated abuse that we hadn't come across before. So we undertook some pretty quick research, and we found that based on our analysis, there'd been about 8,000 instances of this, so very low value transactions with on a very regular basis, multiple transactions at a time with really horrific things in those transaction descriptions. So there'd been 8,000 instances in the preceding 3 months. So it was a much bigger issue than we actually identified. So we realised without our support and without our action, customers were at risk of that. So they could do everything that they could in their power, but ultimately the onus was on us as the banking provider to step in. And so we took action very quickly. We updated our terms and conditions to say, to our customers, you are not to use our platforms for this reasons. It is entirely unacceptable. We've updated policies as a result as well. We have blocked a whole lot of words, I think we've now blocked in the last 5 years over 1 million transactions as a result, transaction descriptions from going through. But we also realised, listening to some of our customers, that some of the most insidious messages are not the ones that contain profanity. They're the ones that say, you look amazing at the train station this morning. I always like you in that purple dress, or I love you. And so we subsequently built an AI model which now runs over our transactions and identifies based on a whole number of parameters, high-risk matters that then go through to our Next Chapter team for human eyes on and then some human responses because And I think, we now look at about 1,500 of those high-risk cases each year. So there are consequences if people continue to use our systems in that way, but it's something that we recognise that we also have a role to play in helping people address that tech-facilitated abuse issue as well.
Since Next Chapter has been up and running, I'm interested in your thoughts on how the community approach and the community awareness and tolerance, I suppose, of tech abuse and of tech abuse on financial platforms has evolved.
Awareness is increasing. More organisations are working together, not just in the private sector. We're also seeing movement in government as well, which is great. Obviously, the coercive control legislation is helping on a state basis. But we also know that perpetrator behaviour is evolving. We know, for example, that we're seeing more emojis being used in transaction descriptions, for example. And if you've watched Adolescence, you know that there is a whole kind of lexicon that comes along with the certain use of emojis in certain patterns. And so that's something that we're staring into. Equally, the use of language other than English and really kind of building out our technology to be able to identify patterns in those. So I think there is definitely greater and heightened awareness, but with that comes a need to work together to stay ahead of some of those evolving behaviours.
And can you speak to, I suppose, the role that humans need to continue to play even as these technological responses emerge? It needs to be human-centred, is your thought, right?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we're very much focused on in my team is safety by design. Now, for those people who may not be across what that means, it's really about building protections into every layer of the design of the things that you're putting out there into the community. So in our instance at CommBank, it's our products and our services. So how are we thinking, in a strange way, like a perpetrator from the very kind of early conceptual stages? And when we're thinking about perpetrator behaviour, it's a really it's been critically important to us that we are coming at that from a position of lived experience. So not just victim survivors, also perpetrators as well. So undertaking research to really kind of listen to perpetrators themselves, listen to victim survivors, listen to experts in the field to then kind of come up with the solutions. What do we need to do here? And I think you can potentially miss that if you're relying on technology. And so those, what happens next, can be picking up the phone to a recipient of those messages and saying, "Are you okay? Can I link you in with other support services? What you're receiving is not okay. It's not acceptable." Right through to on the perpetrator side, issuing warnings, pausing their digital banking access for a period. And in some instances, if the behaviour continues and it's extreme, actually debanking them. So saying to them, we actually don't want you as a customer anymore if you are not willing to abide by our terms and conditions and you're actually causing harm to others.
Pip, for you, what kind of opportunities does technology offer in healing? What do you think?
Definitely the connection. So having connection to communities like online, especially for our remote and regional people, like in sort of way out, all across the country, like being able to connect to the services that you need. I think that's something that our mothers and their mothers didn't have. Knowing that you as a person, you have the right to use the internet, to use devices. It's not sort of controlled by anybody else. If you want a phone, you can get a phone, and you can, I think that's having that autonomy and having that independence is really important for people because they need to be able to make a decision quite often well before a crisis happens so that they're not ending up in that crisis. And common words I pick up when I'm talking to victims is things like, well, he'll let me have the phone for 3 hours a day. And just even that permission-seeking behaviour is a red flag to say, well, what else does he let you do? Is it conditional? Is the relationship conditional or transactional? Because you're your own person. You should be able to decide whatever you want to do. And that's how it is weaponised. So, while it's great that you walk through the door and the doorbell goes off and he can see you on the camera and he knows that you're home safely, that is also the reinforcement of a social norm, that's what's going to happen, and that's not. So I think we have to really look at our tolerance. I talk about tolerance all the time, that threshold of tolerance, but what are some of our deal breakers? And I think our deal breakers are too high. The threshold for deal breakers are just too high. We need to bring them down so that people understand and respect the boundaries that we have, the space that we need to live as our own person. And if they're not there the next day, what does that look like?
Looking back for you, is there a moment that you reflect on where you go, that should have been my deal breaker?
Oh, God, yes. 20 times over. Yeah, and I think that's what you do. You hear what they're saying in conversation, but the behaviours aren't matching. And that's the confusing part, because then you're starting to believe the excuses or the justifications or the defensiveness that comes up when you're challenging what that looks like now. So, and I was skilled. I had a very big, strong awareness of what I was dealing with, but obviously my tolerance was quite high as well, because I would compare myself to what other people were experiencing and go, well, it's not that bad. He's not hitting me. But the way that things were weaponised in tech and just keeping my world small and making my life uncomfortable, that should have been my threshold.
How did you regain that sense of ownership over your digital identity and your life and your tech usage? Well, have you?
Yeah, I have. I think it's a great story though, but I love being able to share it, because I think if it inspires people, then that's what it's about. But ultimately, he taught me to live without him. So with or without him, I was able to survive, right? So as the distance sort of grows, you learn, okay, well, I don't need to do that anymore. But what I decided to do was I took my 3 children and we went to New York for 4 weeks and lived there. And every day I got up and I just said, who do I want to be today? Because I wasn't around my family, but I could do it without him.
Who did you, when you woke up every day in New York, was there a person you chose to be?
Yeah, it was the better version of me, without feeling like I had to think twice, without thinking I had to avoid anything. I felt really safe. Like in New York, you're thinking, wow, you got every corner. But I just built my confidence every day. I studied. I went over there and studied communications and reading and writing and podcasting. And so I just built the person I wanted to be. But I wasn't encumbered by the tech or the other issues that I was having inside my own home. So I think being able to step away from where I was gave me a blank canvas to create the life that I wanted. But emerging that back into my real world was really difficult, and it took a number of years to do that.
Angela, CommBank has been running Next Chapter for 5 years. What makes you hopeful about the next 5 years?
Oh, so many things. If I look across our own organisation, we've got 48,000 employees. And so raising awareness of financial abuse, domestic and family violence, because we know that given the stats, there is a significant number of those staff who are either victim survivors or perpetrators themselves. And so raising awareness within an organisation the size of CBA and CommBank gives me hope that at least organisationally we are talking about it openly and talking about how unacceptable it is. Beyond that, the hope is, or the kind of the areas of rainbows for me is, again, we're getting the message out to not only our 16 million customers, but we are getting the message out beyond those customers, as well as, when I talk to other banks and telcos and utilities, that real focus on safety by design is really shining through as well. And so it's not just the support that we're collectively offering, but it's also making sure that the corporate world of tomorrow, the things that they're doing, the products and the services and whatever it is that they are putting out there, there's actually much greater thinking around, well, how do we actually stop these from been misused by perpetrators of domestic and family violence. So you would hope to think that in the future there'd be much less risk of those things being misused. So I think there is tremendous hope. We're not going to be able to, as I said before, do it alone. It needs a whole of community, whole of ecosystem approach. But I think the mindset is shifting.
Pip, final question to you. On those days when you feel less like the woman you chose to be in New York and perhaps you find it a bit more difficult, what gives you hope?
For me, it's always about reflecting on what I've been able to contribute, because I'm just a baton holder. I'm not the person who's going to fix the problem. I'm one that's going to contribute to it and to make sure that, the next person doesn't experience that. But I think even if they do, knowing how to respond, how to react, knowing where to go for help, I know that. So that is where I sort of say, okay, and I just give myself time to go, the answer will come. Like, I've really got to keep the perspective about, yep, it's unfair or it's not right, and it's harmful, but about how do you react to anything like that? It's about, you get a bit older and you work out emotional regulation works. I've got 4 children I have to consider. I've got, I don't want it to impact on them. So having conversations with them is really difficult for me because it brings up a lot of the pain that I experienced during the relationship and trying to stay there and be safe and keep them safe. You realise the effort that you put in to do that now you've got to really honour the life that you've created. So don't worry, I have my dark days and I have my regrets and my sort of, the confusion sets in because you don't sign up to a relationship to have that happen. But I think if I can turn up to work and I can help people understand what they're going through on that day, then they've got a much better opportunity, and that's the impact that you want to make.
Pip Ray, Angela McMillan, thank you so much for joining There's No Place Like Home, Paths to Healing.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Sal.
This podcast is made in partnership with Commonwealth Bank, who are supporting people within Australia experiencing financial abuse through CommBank Next Chapter, even if you don't bank with them. Contact CommBank's Next Chapter team on 1800 222 387, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sydney, Melbourne time, excluding public holidays, or visit commbank.com.au/Next Chapter. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate and follow or join the movement at futurewomen.com. This episode was hosted by Sally Spicer. Executive producer is Sally Spicer. Our producers are Odessa Blaine and Marcella Rossiano Barrow, who's also our video producer. Geraldine Bilston is our sensitivity consultant, and our supervising producer is Jamila Rizvi. Audio editing by Dave Collins, artwork by Patty Andrews, videography by Charlie Rogers.